What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be going over my Season 9 Shred build here on my Hardcore Druid, and Shred is actually doing really well this season. It is a solid A tier build, and in this video we're going to go over two different setups that are very easy to swap between. One of them is my Wild Heart Boot setup, and the other one is a traditional Shred build that's popped up during this season. And I'm also going to talk about maybe some adjustments that could be made by the devs to actually push Shred into the high A plus or even S tier category. Now, the highest pit tier clear with Shred this season is 107, and I personally have it an A tier 97 with my current gear, and I probably could get a tier or two more, 98, 99, but I want to move on to several other builds before I decide to pit push with Shred. Now, this build excels in all of the content in Torment 4. You will tear through bosses with no problem, and you will achieve a tier 100 pit with some decent gear, but it does not have to be perfect. However, where this build really excels at is farming Nightmare Dungeons as well as Hell Tides. You will absolutely demolish that content. In fact, you'll probably even have to slow down just to collect your resources and gear that drops because of just how fast Shred actually moves. So as you can see, Shred is pretty crazy here in Season 9. So let's go ahead and go over how to play it, and then we're going to go over the gear and all of the little pieces that put this build together. Okay, so now we're going to go over how to play our Shred build, and we're going to go over both setups that are in the planner. But the first setup we're going to go with is the basic Shred setup using Lupine Ferocity and the Direwolf aspect on the boots. So just like any Druid build, the first thing you want to do is build up your shifting buffs, and you're going to do that by holding down the teleport button and canceling it with your Maul basic attack. As you can see here, we're just building up our stacks. And then once you hit 6, you're going to be maxed out, and then all you do from there is pop your Grizzly Rage and go into your Dire form, then start spamming Shred with Howl. Now, the reason why we have our Heraldric spell mapped onto our Rabies is so that way we can use it strategically while we're doing pit pushing, and that will help us push into higher tiers when we need to gather a bunch of elite packs instead of just your random mobs when you're just farming out low tier pits. And all we have to do to activate that is hit X, and then again you want to wait for that ability to come off cooldown and then for it to start flashing before you hit it again when you want to activate your Heraldric spell. And that's really the basics of that setup. Super simple, super easy to use, and honestly most players are probably going to gravitate towards this setup because it is so easy. But if you're looking for a little bit of a busier setup, that might be for those players who are looking to push as high as they can possibly go and even try to showcase a little bit of skill. My Wild Heart setup is probably the build you want to go for. Alright, so again, just to showcase how easy it is to swap into this setup, all you have to do is swap your boots to Wild Heart Hunger Boots, and then swap your pants to a Direwolf aspect pair of pants with the same exact affixes on your basic Shred setup. Then from there, you want to go to your skill tree, and you want to swap from Lupine Ferocity to your Bestial Rampage key passive. Now again, for this setup, we're just going to build up our shifting buffs before we swap into our Dire form with Grizzly Rage. Then we're going to use Howl, but there are going to be some slight differences to the rotation, so that way we can maintain our Wild Heart boot stacks. So it's going to take a little bit longer to build up our Wild Heart boot stacks. So we're shifting more, holding down the teleport and canceling it with Maul. Then once we hit 50, we're going to go ahead and shift into our Dire form, hit our Howl, then go ahead and Shred. And you'll see that our Wild Heart boot stacks are falling off. Now, the best way to keep these refreshed and built up to 50 is just to teleport cancel, and you can do this while you're in pits, and you'll barely notice it. So for me, it's just down on the D-pad to hit the teleport, and then I just hold Shred the entire time, and you can see that it just constantly refreshes my Wild Heart stacks. So it's pretty easy to do, and honestly, this build would probably be the preferred way to play if it wasn't for bossing rooms where you can't teleport. So I know you're probably asking, how are we going to maintain our Wild Heart stacks while we're fighting the boss? And that is the part that might turn most players off, but I actually find it kind of fun to play, and it's a little bit more active and entertaining for me. So when you're fighting a boss, you can obviously not teleport, but you can emote. And if you know what that means, we're going to be emote canceling to maintain our Wild Heart stacks. And for me, it's pretty simple. I typically just hold Shred and Howl when I'm playing with this setup all the time. But what you want to do when you're fighting the boss is let off of your Howl when you see that your Wild Heart stack's around 40 to 45. And then I just press up on my D-pad to open my emote scroll wheel, tap up, and then hit the hello emote. And I can do this a lot faster when I'm actually in the pit, so it's a lot more seamless. That's basically what it looks like. You just hit up, hello, bang, back to it. And this is actually super easy for me. but I know this could be off-putting to a lot of players, and I do enjoy this setup, like I said, because it's a little bit busier and it can require a little bit more skill. But with the Wild Heart setup, you can get a better multiplier than with Lupine Ferocity, as well as cap out your second attack speed bucket. So I think the overall damage is a lot better here, and if you're looking to push into the highest pit tier possible, I think this would be worth doing if you're one of those players who actually enjoys grinding out the pit. So as you can see, they're not too complicated, but we do have a setup that adds a bit more complexity to the build. However, it is not required and you absolutely do not have to play it. I just thought it would be cool to add something for those players who are looking to do a little something to push their damage up a little bit higher to push further into the pits and also increase the skill ceiling for the build as well. Well, let's go ahead and go over my current gear for both setups. So for the helmet running Air of Perdition, and if I did have a GA to crit chance, I would put all my Masterworks into core skills just to buff up the shred damage that much more. On our chest, we're running the Shroud of False Death, and I would love to have a GA to all stats, but I haven't found one yet this season. And if we ever got that, we would Masterwork that up as much as we possibly could. Now for this season, Grizzly Rage is the best overall ultimate we have, so this build will use the Dire Form Werewolf, and because of that, we're going to be running Rampaging Werebeast on the gloves, and we're going to be picking up Max Life, Attack Speed, and Shred. Now, you can flex out that Max Life for Willpower if you'd like to, but because I'm playing in Hardcore, you'll see that I stack out a decent amount of health. Then for our temp ranks, we're running Werewolf Critical Strike chance as well as a bit of Lucky Hit chance to help us proc some of our buffs with this build. Then for our pants, because this is the Wild Heart setup, we're going to be running the Direwolf aspect here. And then we're going to be getting Max Life Willpower as well as added armor. And then for our temperings, we're going to be running Max Life. You can also run Armor Percent here. And then we're going to be picking up some more Lucky Hit chance. Now, if you do not want to run the Wild Heart setup, that's perfectly fine. A good pair of Tybalt's Will is the way to go. And I like to go ahead and throw all of my Masterworks into damage reduction. I mean, it is an absolute crazy amount of damage reduction you get here while being unstoppable. And because we're using Direwolf form, we are always unstoppable. Plus, you get that nice damage multiplier, which is going to be up all the time again because we are running Dire form. Then on the boots for the Wild Heart setup, we're going to be using the Wild Heart Hunger boots. And then we're going to be masterworking the Heightened Senses passive as much as we can here, just to buff up our damage reduction as much as possible. Now again, if you do not desire to run the Wild Heart setup, you can just run a regular pair of boots with the same exact affixes we had on the pants. So you go Max Life, Willpower, and Armor. And then for the temperings, we're going Digigrade Gate ranks because we are going to be in werewolf form, so we're going to get the most movement speed out of that. And then we're going to pick up some Lucky Hit chance. So as you guys seen in the how-to video, it is a simple swap between the pants and the boots that will put you right into a basic shred setup to use Lupine Ferocity for your damage output. Now, I know that the top pick clear is currently using Agile Wolf. However, I personally would not recommend running that setup. Not that it's not a great setup, and you can definitely do it if you are a decently skilled player. But in my opinion, it's a bit too glass cannon. And I think that the average player would probably die a lot more than they would like to while you're running that setup. However, I would recommend, because it's so easy to swap between these setups, that you try everything out and pick which one you enjoy the most. Like I said, I play in hardcore. I love the damage reduction, so either Heightened Senses Wild Heart boots or a big giant chunk of damage reduction while being unstoppable on our Tybalt's Will, depending on which variation of the build you're running. Then for the weapon, we can finally run the Waxing Gibbous here because of several changes that they made to the unique as well as our passives and our skill tree. So if you notice on the Waxing Gibbous, we finally have a passive on the weapon that allows Shred to deal double damage. And that is the big reason why we are running it here, because if it did not have that, we would probably still go with a staff or a pole arm because we want that big giant roll of chance for Shred to deal double damage. Not just that, but Toxic Claws has been changed to give us a damage multiplier this season with our poisoning damage. And again, we're running Direwolf form, so we are going to be using the Rabid Bear aspect, which amps up our poisoning damage and changes all of our damage to poison damage, with the exception of the Stormclaw aspect, which counts as a separate hit of lightning damage. And because of that, the Toxic Claws passive on the Waxing Gibbous is infinitely more valuable this season. In fact, on Werewolf, you get a doubling of the passive's damage multiplier, which is a big reason why Werewolf is excelling so much in Season 9. Then for our totem, this is where we're slotting in the rabid bear aspect, and you can see here we're running max life, willpower, as well as some crit chance. Now I would prefer to have that crit chance be cooldown reduction, but we just need that crit chance right now because we don't have perfect rolls on all of our gear pieces, so that's what we're going to be using for now. But if you look at the planner, you'll see it's cooldown reduction, and I would recommend that if you have a really decent Air of Perdition with a GA to crit chance. Then we're going to be running Werewolf Critical Strike chance, and then the big one is the chance for Shred to deal double damage here, with all of our Masterwork crits going there. And if you manage to get that, like I have, you'll almost have a 100% chance for Shred to deal double damage. Then for our amulet, you'll see we're running the Stormclaw aspect here. Now, one of the big problems with Shred is the build actually lacks enough legendary nodes, as well as some tags that would really make its damage shoot up into the high A tier, even S tier category. So in the future, if they do allow Shred to have a nature magic and storm tag, you'll see this build skyrocket because we'll have a new legendary node we can access, as well as a bunch of different damage multipliers that will apply to the build. But for now, we don't have that, so the Stormclaw is on the amulet, and then we want to get a complete passive amulet like with every Druid build that we have. Unfortunately, Druid is so dependent on that amulet for a ton of its damage output. And the best version of the amulet would be something like Willpower percent or Quick Shift, followed by Envenom as well as Toxic Claws, with Envenom and Toxic Claws being the priority passives for this build. And then all of your Masterwork crits can go into Envenom or Toxic Claws. It's really up to you. They're both phenomenal multipliers. And then for the temp rings, we're going Grizzly Rage Duration and Grizzly Rage Cooldown. Then for our first ring, this is where we're running the aspect of the Blurred Beast, so we're getting a ton of shred hits as well as a pretty decent damage multiplier. And then you can see here I'm running Willpower, Max Life, and Attack Speed, and I would prefer all of my Masterworks to go into Attack Speed. I just haven't re-rolled this ring yet. And then we're picking up more Werewolf Critical Strike chance as well as Grizzly Rage cooldown. Now, if you are running the standard shred setup, I would definitely recommend to have at least 1 or 2 rolls of Werewolf Attack Speed on this build to help juice up your attack speed while you're running that setup. However, because we already have the Wild Heart Hunger Boots, we really don't need that with this version. Then on our second ring, that's going to be the Ring of Starless Skies, and I would prefer to have all my crits into attack speed. However, if you do get a crit into core skills, that is perfectly fine too. But ultimately, I'd like to find a G to attack speed and then Masterwork that as much as possible, just to cap out both buckets and to hit as fast as possible. Now into our rune words, we're going to be running Ahuzan to get that overpower damage onto our shred hits. Now, overpower again has been nerfed this season, but it is still incredibly valuable on this setup, especially because shred can activate this rune word so much that you'll always have that big damage multiplier from the overpowers. Then for our second reward, it's going to be Moni Quas, and the reason why we're using Moni is because our Shred actually counts as a mobility skill, so we will get a ton of offering, which will almost always have our Quas food proccing like crazy, and you definitely need to have a decent amount of spirit generation with this build, so that way you can maintain your spirit enough to actually get the most benefit out of running the Quas rune. Now into our seasonal jewels, we're going to be running the Herodric Crest to give us a little bit of damage reduction, as well as extend the caps on our resistances. Then for the second jewel, we're going to be running Scornful Light, which gives us a lot more damage. However, do be aware that it does make us take an additional 10% increased elemental damage. And then last but not least, it's going to be Idol from Below, which is the MVP jewel of the season if you're pushing pits, because not only does it give us more of our max primary stat as well as HP, but the jewel guardians that spawn from this jewel actually apply to your pit meter when you're clearing your pit tiers. Now onto our Herodric spell, we are going to be using Celestial Surge to give us that pull that we're missing from not running the Kree rune. Now I have asked the devs to please reduce the cooldown of this Herodric spell. I have no idea why it is so long, or whoever decided that would be 12 seconds. That's pretty ridiculous considering all of the other Herodric spells activate quite quickly. So hopefully in the future, they will reduce this cooldown to like 5 or 6 seconds, which is going to make this spell infinitely more better for builds like Shred or Wolves. But for now, we're going to make do, and you will see that I do have this Herodric spell tied to my Rabies skill, because when you're running through pits, you want to use this a little bit more strategically to pull mob packs together and burn them down as fast as possible, and you don't want the randomness of it proccing while you're running Shred. So if you look in the planner, you'll see it's tied to Shred, but it is written into the guide that if you are pushing for high tier pits, you want to use it on Rabies with a little bit of strategy so that way you can maximize your clearing speeds to get to the boss that much faster. Then on the Infusion, we're running Nebulous for the damage reduction. Then for the Arcana, we're going to be using Bloody Charm for the execute. However, because the execute relies on the ocular rune explosion, we're going to be running Frigid Heart, so that way we get a secondary explosion to potentially activate that execute, as well as freeze enemies in place and get that additional pull, because that is what this build is really lacking, is the ability to reliably group enemies. Then for the final Arcana, we are going to be running Sapping Crux. Now, some notable mentions: if you are having issues with your resources, Reactive Ooze is perfectly fine to swap into the setup. And if you are running a lucky hit chance to apply vulnerability affix on your gear pieces, go ahead and swap out Sapping Crux for Fractured Core, because you won't actually need that additional vulnerability. Now moving on to our boons. For the deer, we're going to be running Gift of the Stag for the added resource generation. Then on the eagle, we're going to be running Avian Wrath for the crit damage multiplier. Now, if you would like a little bit more tankiness, go ahead and Spirit Bond into the eagle and pick up Iron Feather to increase your overall max life. However, I'm running this perfectly fine without it in hardcore, so I don't imagine you'll actually need this if you're playing softcore. Then on the wolf, we're going to be picking up Energize just to refill our spirit that much quicker, so that way we can activate our Quas rune with the full double damage effect. And then we're also going to be running Calamity here just to make sure we can maintain our dire form without needing to kill enemies or getting overpower hits. Now you can obviously flex out of this and then run something like Swooping Attacks if you're running the basic setup for this build, if you need a little bit more attack speed to reach your attack speed cap, or even swap it into Scythe Talons if you need a little bit more critical strike chance and lucky hit chance. Then last but not least, on the snake, we're going to be running the Masochistic boon to give us a little bit more health restore. However, you can run something like Overload if you're running the Electrocution glyph like I am, but it's not really necessary because you get plenty of lightning bolts from your Bad Omen passive in your skill tree. Now onto the skill tree, we're going to be running Maul to easily build our shifting buffs. On the core tree, we're picking up 1 point Heart of the Wild and 3 points into Wild Impulses, followed by 5 point Shred into Primal Shred, and then we're going to be picking up 3 ranks into Digigrade Gate. After that, we're going to be running 5 points into Cyclone Armor just to increase our damage reduction from elemental damage that much more. And then we're going to be maxing all 3 of these passives here: Ancestral Fortitude, Vigilance, as well as Backlash. Then we're going 1 point Blood Howl into Innate Blood Howl for the big damage multiplier. After that, for our companion tree, we're going 3 points Feral Aptitude. Then down to the rat tree, we're going 1 point Charged Atmosphere, 3 points Electric Shock, and 3 points Bad Omen, followed by 1 point Neurotoxin, 3 points in Venom, and of course the big multiplier for us this season, Toxic Claws. And as you can see there, it says when you're in werewolf form, the multiplier for this passive is actually doubled. So we're getting a whopping 100% multiplicative damage, and again, that's another reason why we need to get the Toxic Claws passive on our amulet. Then we're going to be picking up 1 point rabies into natural rabies. Now, you don't have to do this. These are flex points. I just like to have rabies so that way I can strategically use my Celestial Surge Heraldric spell. Then down to the ultimate tree, we're going 3 points quick shift and 3 points heightened senses for the damage reduction. Then we're going 5 points in the Grizzly Rage so we get that nice armor bonus for our 5 for 5. And then we're going down to Supreme Grizzly Rage just to make it super easy to maintain our Fortify. And then we're going 3 points in defensive posture for the damage reduction, and then 1 point into Nature's Resolve because it was just a spare point we had. And then last but not least, for our Wild Heart setup, we are using the Bestial Rampage key passive. However, like I said, if you're using the base Shred setup, run Lupine Ferocity because it's going to be a much better damage multiplier. Now into our Paragon board. Like I always tell you guys in my videos, I level up multiple glyphs, so you'll see stuff that's leveled up that I'm not even using. So in this case, we are leveling up the Headhunter glyph with all of our other glyphs. So on our first board, we're going to be running the Electrocution glyph because we will be getting a lot of lightning bolts with this build, so we will get that big damage multiplier from this glyph, and the multiplicative lightning damage does apply to our Stormclaw aspect. Then for the second board, that's going to be the Inner Beast board, and you can see here why we do need maybe an extra tag with this build, because there are no extra legendary nodes that are good for this setup aside from the ones that I currently have. So we will be skipping this legendary node, and we will be socketing in the Keeper glyph here. And I will say I do really like this board because it does have some nice attack speed nodes, so be sure to pick those up when you're using this board. Then for our third board, it's going to be the Lust for Carnage board to get that big multiplier with our critical strikes from our werewolf skills, and we're always going to be critting, so we'll always have this big multiplier up. And then we're going to be socketing in the Fang and Claw glyph here. Then on our fourth board, that's going to be the Height and Malice board, and we're going to socket in the Spirit glyph here and pick up all the Dexterity nodes that surround it. And then last but not least, we're going to be running the Ancestral Guidance board for our fifth and final board, and then we're going to be socketing in the Dominate glyph here. Now for the last part of the build, our Mercenary, and again guys, always be sure to pick up your Mercenary as soon as you enter the game. So for me, I like to go right here because he has this nice passive to give us resistance to all elements, and then we're going down to Bastion because it gives us that nice invulnerability bubble we can hide out in to deal damage. followed by Inspiration, which gives us a nice multiplier while we're standing inside of our invulnerability bubble. Then for our Reinforcement Mercenary, that's going to be Varyana. And I like to run her Bloodthirst skill because it amps up our attack speed. And then obviously we're going to tie that to Shred because it is the skill we use the most. But that is our Shred build here for Season 9, and this build has been a blast to play. And I do plan on revisiting this build and clearing a tier 100 and maybe pushing a little bit further so I can set that up on the unofficial leaderboards. And I highly recommend that you guys try this build out if you're a Shred enjoyer from previous seasons or are a new player to the Druid class. You'll have a ton of fun on this build, and because it is performing so well, a solid A tier build, I think you're going to have a lot of fun no matter what variation of Shred build you decide to go with. Now, as always, guys, if you have any questions regarding this build or any of my other builds, feel free to post them in the comment section below. And I am going to be moving on to my Lightning Storm setup, which a lot of you guys have been requesting. However, the build planner is already completed. I just have to add a lot more writing to it. So if you are interested and you're familiar with the Lightning Storm build already, go ahead and click the link in the description box to my build planners, and you can select the Lightning Storm setup. It's called Lycan Storm in Mobalytics, and you can just follow that guide. It at least has the structure to it right now, and like I said, I will be adding more explanation to the build in the future. Also, if you made it this far in the video and you learned something new and you enjoyed the overall content, feel free to hit the like and subscribe button. It helps the channel grow. But with that being said, guys, as always, I hope you're having a great day or a great night, depending on wherever you're from, and peace out. I will see you in the next one.